Welcome, everybody, to a very exciting Super Saturday. You know, all our Super Saturdays are exciting, but they're even more exciting when we've got a special guest. And today it's Dr. J. Frederic Templeman. And Dr. Templeman and we, Eddie and I, have been business associates and friends now. It's hard to believe. November will be 15 years. Boy, does time go fast, especially as we get older. So let me give you an official little bio about Dr. Templeman, and I can't do it justice in a short period of time, but we're going to do the best we can. Dr. Templeman is a primary care physician, board certified in both the United States and Canada, now retired, but had over 20 years of clinical experience, and now he's the medical director of phytoceutical research. Dr. Templeman is internationally sought after, not only as a speaker, but he's also an author on health, nutrition, and the healing properties of our beloved mangosteen fruit. Dr. Templeman and his wife, Michelle, believe it or not, look how good he looks. In fact, he looks better today than when we met him 14 years ago. The parents of 10 children. How many grandchildren? Can you keep count?
34 with one coming this week.
Oh, my goodness. Everybody has to wear name tags, that's for sure. And I'm going to quote Dr. Templeman. And he says, I still lose sleep thinking about what the mangosteen means to the world of dietary supplements. As I travel around the country lecturing on health benefits of mangosteen, I am inevitably asked to comment on the science behind the fruit. And as a result, I carry with me a large binder that's almost 4 inches thick, and it contains many of the journal articles and research papers from schools of pharmacy and medicine where scientists have put the mangosteen xanthons to the test under experimental conditions. And, you know, what is so exciting is that Dr. Templeman and Dr. David Morton actually coined the word superfruit, and I'm sure Dr. Templeman will mention that. The impersonal facts of the studies are set out in cold, scientific terms that describe cell cultures, spectrometric analysis, and observations in laboratory animals. And he has been quoted for over 14 years, and I continue to quote, I'm convinced that mangosteen will, without a doubt, be the most successful food supplement ever, and it'll be bigger than aloe vera. So today we are so blessed to have an update on what I termed behind the mangosteen. So Dr. Templeman, I'm going to now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Could you hit the next slide?
Sure.
Now, from the very first presentation that I made 15 years ago, I have always emphasized that there is a hierarchy of requirements as far as optimal health is concerned, and diet is by far the greatest one. You can't really make up for it by supplementation, even though it would be very nice if we could sort of make up for the deficiencies in the diets that we choose with exercise and supplementation. Pretty much impossible to do. However, all of them are absolutely essential if you want to optimize your health at any time in your life, and it's never too late to start. I was not particularly healthy in the early part of my, well, in my childhood I was very healthy, but in the middle part of my life, marriage ruins men's bodies. And as a result of that, I had gotten married and gained 30 pounds, and I just couldn't get rid of those 30 pounds for many, many years. And that did things to my psyche and to my physical health that weren't good. Next slide, please. Now, the phytochemical categories of significance in the mangosteen, what I'm thinking about here is there are plant-made chemicals, which we call phytochemicals because they're of plant origin. And there are families of these various substances and ingredients. And the families may contain, in the case of the xanthones, they contain more than 70 different entities, and pretty much every month a few more of them are being discovered. But there are also proanthocyanidins, anthocyanidins, catechins, polysaccharides, benzophenols, and phytosterols. And these categories are all important not only because they have direct benefit for human health, but because in the mangosteen, which is why we called it a superfruit, they are of significant quantitative importance. When you look at the various fruits, plants, herbs, the things we call botanicals, and you look at what is in them that may be beneficial for human health, you can usually find that one of these categories will predominate. But, for example, almost all of the science for the mangosteen has to do with the xanthones, yet they are not the most plentiful in terms of quantity in the mangosteen fruit. The catechins, actually, by dry weight, compose more than 25% of the mangosteen fruit. So the xanthones, while they get all of the attention because they're unique and special, and if you look at the next slide, these are the things that can be only found in the mangosteen, and therefore they've attracted a lot of scientific attention since the mangosteen came on the international scene 15 years ago. It was the XANGO company that actually made the first product from the mangosteen that was not just the plain fruit. Now, the fruit exists in 17 different countries, being cultivated in new countries virtually all of the time, but it takes a while to get a plant up and going, about 5 years. It used to take longer, but they've gotten better with their selective breeding. And in every marketplace that I've been in, and I've been in most of the countries where it grows, it is the most expensive fruit in the marketplace because it's sought after for the white portion, which you can see here in the center, which is delicious. And the outside, however, which is called the pericarp or the rind, it's very thick, and it composes about 50% of the weight of the actual fruit itself, is what is important with regard to most of the health benefits. And this is the part that they use in the traditional medicine paradigms of Ayurveda in India, in Southeast Asia, in Thai traditional medicine, evidence of it for centuries in Chinese medicine. Imported also grows in a couple of the southern Chinese provinces. So very, very important for the things that don't particularly taste good, because the mangosteen pericarp, the first time that I tasted it, it caused trismus, the automatic locking of the masseter muscles, the jaw muscles, and I wasn't able to get the spoon out of my mouth, and I was on camera at the time that I was doing it. But the xanthones are really what has got the scientists interested, but it's not the reason that this is a superfruit. It's because it has all of those categories and important quantitatively, and most other plants really only have one. So next slide, please, Sandy. Now, these are my predictions, and one of them I only just made really last week when I was speaking in Vancouver, and that's the second one. But back in 2003, when I had used this for approximately a year or more in my patients, and actually, no, by that time I'd used it for close to 3 years. But that was I just lost my slides. Hold on for a second. That was the time that I could see with my patients that this fruit really did make a difference. And at that point in my medical career, I had become a little bit frightened about the fact that I had a patient of mine arrest due to a drug complication. And he was a young man. He was only in his 20s. And I felt like I'd killed him. His heart stopped. And we were able to get him back, and we straightened things out. And I started to look at alternatives to the drugs because, of course, you may have heard that the Hippocratic Oath says first do no harm, and I was really concerned at that point in my career that possibly I had been unconsciously harming people with the cocktails and the drugs that I had been using, largely because that's the way I'd been taught to practice medicine, even though I'd been exposed to natural medicine in different paradigms. But last week I said this: the mangosteen in the future will never have a smaller scientific or commercial footprint than it does today. And I'm very comfortable in saying that because we are now very, very close to surpassing the aloe vera. Certainly in the medical field and the research field, we've already done that in terms of having drugs and other pharmaceuticals elaborated from the mangosteen. There's never been any drug that's been developed from the aloe vera, to give you a comparison. But it's never going to be smaller than it is now. And it's really becoming quite large. Certainly the scientists are interested. And to my point today, what I want to make as a point with you is I want you to be able to feel the enthusiasm that I feel when I start to read every week different articles that appear in the scientific literature, and they're appearing now at about 3.5 articles per month in the database that the NIH keeps called PubMed, where all of the medical research pretty much in the world that gets exposed more or less. So the mangosteen is there, it has an important presence, and it continues to be commented on by scientists. Could you hit the next slide and we'll take a look at just exactly where it stands at present. There are over 500 scientific papers that have been published. And when I say over 500, like I say, they're coming out every month. I have read them all. There are scientists in 19 different countries right now who are currently researching the fruit's phytochemicals, and there's a lot of interest in the past few months from Korea and, strangely enough, from Saudi Arabia. When the scientists find something that they get positive feedback from, because they all have a postulate or a theory about what they're going to find out when they start an experiment. And when they do get a positive result, then that starts a positive feedback cycle, which means that there's going to be more and more research done in that area because people are finding things and they are succeeding in getting the proof that they require to be able to become enthusiastic about it. There are drugs, pharmaceuticals, which have been elaborated and are being sold now in Japan and in Thailand. One in the anti-inflammatory category in Japan, concocted, patented, and being used and sold by a university, and in Thailand also by universities. The universities nowadays are getting very much involved in commercial activities as another resource for their financial input. And so they're encouraging their professors not only to do the research or to establish procedures and things, but to get patents and then to be able to license these to commercial enterprises. There are commercial products now that are sold in more than 45 countries in the world, and that is directly the result, in my opinion, of the XANGO company coming into existence and putting out this natural drink, which is nothing except mashed up mangosteen and a few essences from other fruits to be able to make it palatable. But there are over 10 major supplement companies who all have important commercial mangosteen products now. You can't keep a good thing down, and even though mangosteen was first introduced by the XANGO company and they continue to dominate the market, the fact is that anybody who is in the business of health is not going to ignore something like the mangosteen, and so there are many other products that are out there competing with the mangosteen juice from XANGO. Next slide, please. The science itself is important for two reasons in my mind. First of all, the best proof of whether something from the botanical arena is going to make a difference in human health does not come from laboratories. It comes from traditional paradigms where practitioners have been using the product from nature for millennia sometimes. And of course, we don't have records that go back that far, but certainly we do centuries. And when you have centuries of the use of a product, you know absolutely that this product works because people just don't keep using, trading, spending money to get a hold of something that doesn't work. And secondly, you know that it is safe. And the reason for that is because people are not stupid and they don't continue to use something which, even if it did have benefits, is going to have so many side effects and problems that it makes it dangerous. So the best evidence that exists, without a doubt, doesn't come from modern science. It comes from traditional history of the use of a product, and that is present with the mangosteen, and happens to be the reason for which the XANGO company became interested in this fruit and its potential health benefits long ago. Where is the science? And we're going to take a look at that today. I've taken a selection of certain papers because there is another important factor, and that is that scientists can say what they want to say based on their observation of the results in the experiments that they have set up, carried out, and evaluated. On the other hand, you as distributors or as just people who may be using supplements, or even me as a physician, we cannot talk about the mangosteen and the results that it may have in the same way, because it is not permitted by law. In the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and in most of the places where the products can be sold to the public, people are not allowed to make claims that are called health claims. You can make some structure and function claims, which are more general statements regarding the benefits with regard to body systems, but you cannot make claims for any diseases. And you can't even do that if the claim is inferred. And so in a strange kind of a way, even though I had seen things happen with my patients, and over the 15 years that I've been sort of monitoring what's happening in the world with the mangosteen, I've certainly seen many, many things that are striking, and I have heard of many more that I haven't seen or personally observed, but I can't really talk about it with regard to the diseases where the results have been obtained, because the kind of science that is required to be able to make scientific claims in the developed world simply doesn't exist, and it never will exist. It costs approximately, according to Tufts University's most recent evaluation, it costs approximately $1 billion plus to bring a drug to market. And unfortunately, in the laws in the United States and Canada, the kind of evidence that allows you to make a claim regarding disease is the kind of evidence that's obtained from spending that much money in randomized controlled human trials. These could be called clinical trials. When you hear the term clinical trials, you infer correctly that we're talking about the results in human beings. And these are very expensive. As I've suggested, only large pharmaceutical companies and countries like China, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, can carry out the kinds of studies that are necessary to make those kind of claims. So we can't make them. But the scientists who do the studies, they're not bound by the same sort of limitations that we are, and so they can say what they want. And we can quote them, and that's why I've gone to direct quotes from scientific papers. And this is a selection just basically of the ones that have come out in the past few months. Plus I went back a couple of years to show you the kind of science that existed and how striking it was 5 or 6 years ago compared to the present time, and it remains striking and is attracting the interest of the scientists. So let's look at the first one. And this is a recent paper. And this is a quote from paper where the scientist says, in the near future, mangosteen, and remember I told you that in the xanthone category, there are more than 70 of these elements that are in the mangosteen, and the Mangosteen is an old xanthone. It's one that we've known about since the very beginning. But it can be used as an adjunct to scaling and root planing in periodontitis. Now, periodontitis means gum disease where the teeth are being attacked at a deeper level by the bacteria which are karyogenic or which eat away the enamel and eventually cause tooth loss. And this is an Indian study where, if you can imagine, basic dental hygiene sometimes is a big problem in a country with as many people as India has. And so this was something that the Indian researchers are really interested in. Can we go to the next slide? Again, this is India, and they're talking about tooth decay. This is another study. And here's a quote. Mangosteen pericarp extract has a high zone of inhibition. Now, what are they talking about? Here they have taken, if you can look down a little bit into the second line, Lactobacillus acidophilus. This is a type of microbe that attacks tooth enamel and gums. Streptococcus sanguis, same thing. Streptococcus mutans, that's the big one. Streptococcus oralis and Streptococcus salivarius. These are all forms of microbes that attack the teeth and the enamel, the dentin, and cause the loss of tooth and perhaps pain and tooth decay. And the zone of inhibition means that they're actually got a petri dish. A petri dish looks like the top of a peanut butter jar turned upside down. They then put some agar in there, which is usually derived from the blood of some animal. And the bacillus, or the microorganism, is inoculated into that medium, and it grows. And you can see it grow on the top, exactly the same way you can see mold on a piece of bread that is left out, or some food stuff where you can see the actual change on the surface of the food. That's what you look at. And then you inoculate in the same area a little bit of the mangosteen xanthone. You just make a little drop in the center of the growth of the microbe, and you watch what happens. And what happens when there is an effect from that particular substance or xanthone is that there's a clearing of the growth. There's an actual halo that forms around the area where it has been dropped into the culture. And so that's what they call the zone of inhibition. And so what they're saying is mangosteen pericarp extract had a high zone of inhibition. And this is not taking a single xanthone. This is just taking the juice from the outside of the plant. And they drop it in, and it shows rapid effect. And you'll see that later on, one of these studies, they showed an 85% reduction of MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, and one of the superbugs that up until a couple of years ago killed 60,000 Americans a year. We're now got that number down to 40,000, but that's still a lot of people dying from a from a bug where we really don't have effective antibiotics anymore. Next slide. Psoriasis is a problem that some people have from birth, and most people develop later on in life. Like I have a couple of psoriatic spots which are called nummular psoriasis, and they're common in older folks. And they are a problem with the immune system. The immune system is going nuts in a specific area, and causing the skin cells to have a rapid turnover, growing much faster. Not like a cancer necessarily, but the same idea of rapid turnover and thickening and scaling and redness and pain and itchingness, cracking, etc. And in mice models, because as I told you before, the kinds of studies that we do primarily on the mangosteen xanthones are in animals and also in petri dishes, etc. And this was a mouse study, and it suggested that a rather new xanthone, one that's only been discovered for a few years, called isogarcinone, and these names are very, very similar. You'll see in the next study there's almost exactly the same name. But it's a promising immunosuppressive agent for treating psoriasis. So by using it in mice where we have touched their immune system to the point that we have caused psoriasis, we then give them the xanthone, and it shows that it will dampen that improper immune response that is causing the psoriasis in mice. Now, does that mean that you can keep your mice free from psoriasis? Yes, it does. Good proof of that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do the same thing in humans, but like I said, many people have talked to me about benefits that they have received, and psoriasis is one of the areas where I've heard those stories. Next slide. Multiple sclerosis. Again, you'll see here that a lot of Chinese studies in the last 2 or 3 years. Great interest in China, and I'm going to tell you why in a few minutes. But this is another quote. Our data suggests that isogarcinol, and those slightly different mangosteen xanthone, has the potential to be an effective agent of low toxicity for treating MS and other autoimmune diseases. Now, I told you that psoriasis was an autoimmune disease. The category of autoimmune diseases is becoming larger all the time. In other words, we're discovering more and more types of autoimmune diseases, meaning that the body's immune system is attacking self or cells that belong to the body as if they were bad or the agents of disease, and that kind of attack by the immune system is misdirected in autoimmune diseases. It's certainly important to have the proper diseases attacked by the immune system, and we do have immunotherapy to be able to stimulate the immune system in the case of cancers, but we need at times to dampen that immune response to be able to hit these autoimmune diseases. And so they're saying that multiple sclerosis. Now, I saw benefits to patients who had multiple sclerosis in my practice from just using a small amount of the juice, but I couldn't ever give you a detailed reason about why it was happening, but that information is coming post facto from scientific studies now in 2016, even though I was seeing this in 2001, 2002. All right, next slide. Food packaging. We waste in the United States 40% of our food. It never gets to the table, and then there's a greater wastage, not a greater wastage, but an important wastage after it gets to the table. And food is something that is in relatively short supply, and so being able to have food packaging that will stop the degeneration of food that is wrapped in it is extremely important. And here they've taken synthetic versions of alpha mangosteen, which is the commonest and the most abundant of the xanthones in the mangosteen, and they have shown in studies that there's high antibacterial and antifungal activity, and that these agent products could be used as active agents in materials for the biomedical and for the food industry. That's the conclusion of these scientists in the Arab world who are getting very interested in this. And you notice that they've already synthesized some of these xanthones. Before there is going to be a drug, there is going to be a synthetic form of the natural product. And the xanthones have, many of them have been synthesized by various interests around the country. I've mentioned the Japanese. Well, by the way, the Japanese preparation is natural. It's not synthetic. But there are other synthesized versions of antimicrobials in Thailand, particularly for acne, etc. Next slide, please. This is malaria in Indonesia. Now, malaria kills people more often than dengue fever, and I don't have statistics for malaria, but I do know that the WHO says that dengue fever, which is not as deadly, but importantly, will kill 1 person every 12 minutes in the world. So obviously malaria is worse than that. And the problem with malaria is that the parasites which cause the disease are becoming resistant to the chemical formulations that we've been using in the form of drug cocktails to look after it. The most recent of these drugs is called artemisinin, and this is something that people who are going to go to malaria prevalent areas of the world will start taking several weeks beforehand so that hopefully they won't contract the disease. But even this, the most recent of the drugs, is now becoming resistant. The bacteria, the microbial agents that are causing the disease, the parasites, are resistant to even this. And this was an example in a lab of being able to use it in combination with that drug and overcome the resistance that exists. And that's exactly the same thing that happens with MRSA, plus on its own, without the drug, it is capable of killing the causative organism. Next slide. By the way, there are more than 12 papers about the anti-malarial effect in the literature. Now, anti-obesity, we've got an obesity epidemic in the world. About 4 years ago, the WHO announced that there were now more overweight, undernourished people in the world than there were underweight, undernourished people. We used to think about people in Africa. We'd see these pictures of skeletal children and people with swollen bellies, etc., from kwashiorkor and from the other wasting diseases when people can't get enough of the nutrients that they require. But now we have horrifically sick people who are not thin. They're overweight, in fact. And so this is an important paper because there are 2 products being manufactured in the world at the present time, largely on the basis of the studies that have been done with the mangosteen xanthone showing that there are anti-obesity effects. And again, the scientists can speak to it directly. They say, this review summarizes the chemical and pharmacological studies related to Garcinia mangostana, including weight reduction and anti-adipogenesis. That means how do you stop fat cells from filling up? How do you stop fat cells from proliferating? Anti-inflammation, because in obesity and the fat cells there is an inflammatory stimulus to grow, and antioxidation, which is a whole other topic, but it applies in the anti-obesity studies as well. And again, this is certainly not the only paper for anti-obesity. I'm aware of at least 6. Next slide. Muscle building. This was an interesting one, and the first one that I'd seen in 2014. I stuck it in here because lean body mass is what governs the metabolic basal rate of the body, and the only real easy way to change that basal metabolic rate is by increasing your lean body mass compared to the amount of fat in your body. And what they were looking at here was the development of a cell when it's a stem cell and it's going to become something different, because stem cells give rise to all of the types of cells in the body. But they did a study that looked at a micro assay analysis looking at the DNA, and they saw that the genes associated with myoblast, now myoblast means a cell which is turning into a muscle cell, was upregulated in alpha-mangosteen treated cells, so that if you treated the cell in culture with the mangosteen, alpha-mangosteen, you would be able to see an increase in the rate of genetic governing of the development of muscle. Now that's a little bit exotic in the sense that it's fairly complicated, but in basic facts, what it means is that there is a favorable effect on the development of muscle when alpha-mangosteen is present. Next slide. Wound and ulcer healing. This was a study done in Thailand a few years ago, and again, I quote it now, even though it's from 3 years ago, because this is a traditional medicine solution that is painted by the traditional practitioners in the villages of Thailand. It looks a little bit murky. It has the color of the mangosteen, and it's water soluble, so they paint it on ulcers. They paint it on cuts. They paint it on insect bites. And it has remarkable antibacterial, and in this case what they were looking at was, again, the methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, so the superbug, so it kills superbugs, and it certainly does in these studies. Then it can be inferred, as well as looking at other studies that show that it will also kill other bacteria like the ones we saw in the mouth for dental caries. But it had strong anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects as well. So they're looking at what the traditional practitioners have used for centuries and finding the reasons why it works. Next slide. The metabolic syndrome. This is the thing that happens to men when they lose their butts and they develop little pot bellies. They end up having high blood pressure, increased blood sugar, and increased blood fats or lipids. And again, this is Saudi Arabia because the epidemic of obesity is present there, as well as in all of the other developed countries of the world and some of the lesser developed countries of the world. But what they did here was they looked at the phenolic compounds, and this one was studying both benzophenols and xanthones from the mangosteen, and they showed that the vasoconstriction that exists because of the messenger molecules that are elaborated when you start to develop fat in your belly, or mental fat, would cause vasoconstriction, and that drives up blood sugar and is related also to the problems, not blood sugar, but blood pressure, and is related also to increased blood sugar and blood fats. But it showed that when you took aorta from people who died and who in fact had the disease called metabolic syndrome, they were able to show that by dropping it onto this material, that the vasodilatation was present, and at a microscopic level there was the generation of nitric oxide, which is the strongest vasodilator that we're aware of working in the body, and we have made many drugs out of that as well. Next slide. Fatty liver disease. Again, another thing that happens when you start to develop fat in your abdomen. It infiltrates the liver, which is the organ of preference as far as eliminating toxins from the body. And this used to be something we saw only in alcoholics for many, many years. Now we're seeing it just in fat people. And so the treatment of it, and it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, used to be called NASH. But the fact is that it's now just straightforward, responsible for more cases of cirrhosis than alcoholism at the present time in the world. So really a big, big problem, and they were looking at what happens when they treat laboratory preparations of liver and with the mangosteen xanthones, and they saw that it represented a novel nutritional approach to the use of alpha-mangosteen in the prevention and treatment of NAFLD, not only in laboratory petri dishes, etc., but also in mice where they have simulated the fatty liver and metabolic syndrome that we find in humans. They've actually genetically been able to raise rats that have those diseases that are associated with these conditions. Next slide. Now, Alzheimer's disease and diabetes have something in common. The AGEs, now this means advanced glycosylation end products. It means that when you get a little bit too much sugar in your blood on a constant basis, it tends to stick to things, almost like taffy does. And it preferentially sticks to proteins. And this protein stickiness impairs the function of blood vessels. It causes heart conditions. It is responsible for the loss of eyesight in diabetics, as well as the loss of function in their kidneys, and in the kind of plaques that we see in the brain in Alzheimer's disease. And again, they tested here, and this was a non-clinical exam, so these are in test tubes, but they tested 8 xanthones, and each one of them significantly inhibited the formulation of AGEs in a dose-dependent manner. In other words, when they exposed the tissues, the protein, to the high content of sugar in the cultures, they were able to see a notable decrease in the problems that happened as far as the stickiness of the proteins was concerned. Next slide. And I think I'm getting too long here. Am I getting too long on this? I haven't been watching our time. Diabetes and Alzheimer's disease, and again, I told you Korea's gotten very interested in doing things. But here's what they said. We found that the mangosteen extract significantly inhibited neuronal damage in rats. And this is the kind of thing that happens both in diabetes and in Alzheimer's. And by the way, diabetics are at much greater risk for Alzheimer's than non-diabetics. And they based their findings on indicating that there was a neuroprotective and also a memory-enhancing effect. So they could run mazes, swim through complicated blockages, and learned more effectively when they were fed the mangosteen than when they weren't. And so they conclude, and again, they're making the statements, not us, mangosteen may be useful for the prevention or treatment of Alzheimer's disease. And once again, I can tell you a story of a man who was the janitor in the hospital where I worked for many years. This fellow demented very rapidly. He didn't have a slow kind of onset. He had a situation where in 2 years he went from relatively normal, able to function and do his job, to a situation where he couldn't be left alone at home, where he would leave water and the stove on and problems like that, and required supervision, and lost the ability to remember who people were. Even though I'd known him for years, he didn't know who I was. His wife put him on the juice, and he started to use it regularly at small amounts with his meals. And within a week, I called the home to speak to the wife because he was my patient, and he recognized my voice on the telephone. And then when I saw him, he recognized who I was. So not only did he derive some benefit from slowing the disease down, but he was able to reverse some of the very significant losses that he had had. And I can tell you about that because he was my patient. I observed this, and it's a direct observation from my practice. Next slide. Diabetes. Diabetes on the type that we see in the world today, largely in people who are obese, is type 2 diabetes. We used to call it adult onset. We don't do that anymore now because we've got kids with the same kind of diabetes due to the malnutrition and the obesity that exists in our populations. But it exists with very, very high levels of insulin. There's an idea that insulin, which is the hormone that is responsible for getting sugar into the cells and out of the blood, that it's low. In people who are type 1 diabetics, absolutely they can't produce any insulin at all. But in type 2 diabetics, the standard is that there's much, much higher level of insulin in type 2 diabetics than in the normal population. And the reason for this is that there is a resistance to the effect of insulin, and that comes from the fat cells and some rather complicated metabolic processes where messengers are sent that stop insulin from being effective. Therefore, the body produces more and more of it. And eventually, the insulin-producing pancreatic cells, called beta cells, will die out because they are simply overused. Well, the mangosteen in animal studies has shown that it can increase the population of insulin-producing pancreatic beta cells, thereby reducing some of the insulin resistance and also improving the actual production of insulin so that there can be a more homeostatic response when high sugars are the problem. Next slide. Again, I think this next slide is diabetes. And this was a 40-week rat study, so most studies are not that long. So the longer the study, the more effective and proper the conclusions can be. And here they talk about alpha-mangosteen, again the xanthone, having anti-hyperglycemic, in other words, dropping the level of blood sugar, anti-hyperlipidemic, dropping the level of the bad cholesterol, and increasing insulin sensitivity by improving beta cell function in type 2 diabetes mellitus. These are rats, again, that are bred to be diabetic and fed to be diabetic, and then they intervene with the natural product to be able to see what is the effect on the disease process. Next slide. This was a study that was done in Thailand last year, and it was important because there aren't a lot of human studies. There are only about 8. But during the 24-week study, they fed a mangosteen extract from the pericarp to volunteers. This was Macedon University, the one that has already marketed the anti-acne antibiotics for the benefit of the university through a commercial interest in Thailand. And during the 24-week study, there were only minor and tolerable side effects were reported. Blood studies showed no liver or kidney dysfunction, and the oral administration of this mangosteen preparation enhanced the antioxidant capability of red blood cells and decreased oxidative damage to proteins within red cells and whole blood. So again, a good human study, not randomized controlled, but a good human observational study to look to see if there is a potential damage that is done from using the mangosteen in high amounts every day, and there doesn't appear to be. Next. Superbugs, tuberculosis, Thailand, 2012. I went back to see this. Know that there are more than 7 studies now on MRSA and several others on other forms of superbugs that follow that are in the class of what we call enterobacteria from the gut. And all of the analogs of alpha mangosteen, and here again they are synthesizing the alpha mangosteen. All of the analogs were active against the multi-drug resistant strains of mycobacteria. In this particular case, mycobacteria cause tuberculosis. And there is a big problem in the world, again, with tuberculosis, which is resistant to the standard drug regimens that we use to control it when someone is diagnosed with it. Next slide. Superbugs in Singapore, again, alpha mangosteen exhibited rapid bactericidal activity against MRSA, MRSA, and that was the one I was referring to when I told you that there was an 85% eradication within 5 minutes. By the way, there was another study looking at strep mutans, the bacteria that causes tooth decay, and in less than a minute there was an 80% killing off of the bacteria exposed to alpha mangosteen. Next slide. Now, here's where I want to just make sure that you understand something that's really important. China has about 42 million students in higher education. We have in North America about 21 million. They obviously have a smaller percentage of their population going on to higher education, but the numbers are so huge that it is allowing them to do something which has never happened before and which is anathema to most of the people who believe in classical university education, where you can go to a single campus and find maybe 15 different disciplines where you can get higher education in them. In China, they have this China Pharmaceutical University situated in one of their large cities where they have 30,000, in excess of 30,000 students in one university that only has pharmacy. So if you took a look at the people, normally there's a breakdown of about 2/3, 1/3 undergraduate to postgraduate, meaning masters and PhDs and postdoctorates, etc. There's a ratio of students, and if you assume that that's true, then in this one university they got more PhDs looking at drug design, and the other word that was left out of that title was the Laboratory of Drug Design and Optimization. So they're there only to design drugs from natural products, and they were looking in this first article at the general things that xanthones had been shown to do in the scientific studies, and they were looking at bacterial infections, malaria, cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's disease. So they're looking at all of those areas with the purpose of developing drugs. China is going to surpass India as the largest producer of drugs in the world within a very short period of time because of this tremendous specialization and concentration that they have, plus nobody imitates things as well as the Chinese. And so we're going to see all kinds of drugs coming out of China. My own prediction is that they'll have a cancer drug within the next year or so. It will come from this university because the next study, go to the next slide, is also from this university, and it's a review paper. And let me tell you how I've used this paper. When occasionally in the discussions that I have with patients who are suffering from cancer, and I am urging them to change their diet and to do other lifestyle things that are going to impact the disease, as well as using mangosteen and other natural elements in an ancillary way to the standard treatments that they're receiving from their doctors, very often the doctors object to the fact that they're using things that the doctors don't understand, botanicals. And I have actually sent this paper to a number of doctors who were telling their patients, look, you don't want to do this. We don't know whether it's harmful. We don't know whether it's beneficial. Just don't bother doing it. And the majority of doctors take that position. There are some who don't. But every time that I've sent the paper to them and that they have perused the paper, I don't think they read it all the way through because it's 35 pages. But when they peruse this paper, they immediately withdraw their objection to the use of mangosteen in cancer patients. So it's really very important. And read what they say in here. By the way, this is the second paper only that I've seen coming out of China where it doesn't look like somebody threw a bunch of Chinese characters into Google Translate, because most of the language translation in their papers is awful. But this one's absolutely perfect, because I'm certain that this university is paired with an English-speaking university. The Chinese universities and the Thai universities and the Japanese universities now are twinning themselves with universities where people speak English so that they can send their students for part of their education to the English-speaking university, because English is the language of science throughout the world. But here's what they say. Cancer chemoprevention is a promising strategy that is taken to block, listen to that, block, reverse, or slow down carcinogenesis. That's the beginning of cancer. Alpha-mangosteen, a natural xanthone, has been reported to interfere with all the major stages of carcinogenesis. So initiation, the actual change that takes place in the cells to become cancerous, the promotion, the actual growth, and the progression, which means the movement to other parts of the body, what we call metastases. And the current available preclinical and mechanistic data has indicated that alpha-mangosteen is a promising candidate to be used in the chemoprevention of cancer. Read between the lines. We are going to make a chemopreventive drug. And by the way, that's the fastest growing category of anti-cancer medications. We have chemotherapy, which kills all cells that are rapidly growing. So it just, you give it to the body and you hope that you kill the bad cells before you kill the good cells. And then we have immune stimulation, which is almost as awful to experience when we crank up the immune system and hope that it's going to pick off the cancer, but the side effects are virtually as bad, but they don't kill you, as bad as the chemo side effects. And the third classification are substances that introduced to the body will attack only cancer cells and only the cancerous process and not harm the rest of the organism. So you can imagine why there's great interest in that, because the other things that we do in cancer treatment are pretty awful, and this one isn't, and the mangosteen sits right square and central in that situation, according to the scientists. I can't tell you that it will treat cancer. I haven't got that kind of evidence, but these people are obviously saying that they think it's a promising candidate. Next. Cancer, again, and here I put this one in because they talk a little bit about the historical use. They say traditionally parts of Garcinia mangostana have been used to treat abdominal pain, hemorrhoids, food allergies, arthritis, leukorrhea, that's a gynecological condition, gonorrhea, diarrhea, dysentery, wound infection, suppuration, and chronic ulcers. And these people have looked at that traditional history as the basis for why they're looking at something more specific. And in this study, we examined the anti-cancer activity against liver, breast, and colon cancer cell lines. Again, not in animals this time, but in petri dishes. 14 compounds, xanthones, were isolated from the mangosteen, and the cancer-killing properties reinforce the utility of the fruit as a natural cytotoxic agent against various cancers. Once again, not harming normal cells, but apparently honing in on cancer cells to do damage where the damage needs to be done. Next slide. Now, we're at the end of this, and I just want to show you that there are papers, if you want to go into the literature, that exist on colon, skin, stomach, liver, breast, brain, prostate cancer, lung and muscle and bone cancer. And one oncologist that I've been working with for more than 5 years has now got more than 109 patients where he believes that using small amounts of mangosteen has very definitely changed the trajectory of their illness, and in many cases he believes it's the reason that they are alive today. Now, he doesn't let me use his study broadly, but I did take 6 cases with me the last time I went to China a few months ago and presented them to 16 cancer surgeons in a presentation that he allowed me to have those studies. So it's very striking stuff. And again, I've said that I believe that the Chinese will have at least one anti-cancer drug based on the mangosteen within the next 2 years. Next slide. These are the other medical conditions that you can go into PubMed and just put in these conditions and mangosteen, and you'll get the studies if you're interested. But food and environmental allergies, ulcers and gastritis, rashes and eczema, microbiota disturbances, those mean the good things that live in our gut that we depend upon for health. That's called the microbiota. There's about 2.5 kilos of it in most of us, and it can get really upset from medication, from bad diet, and we need to treat it. Soon it will be, in my prediction, an organ system that everybody will be talking about. But there's arthritis, dementia, inflammation, and of course the antioxidant effect of this plant, which is really striking. Next slide. So it is easy to see that there really is only one true superfruit, because it has all of these things, and I've only referred to a little bit of the research in recent times regarding the mangosteen and health conditions that the scientists are interested in. But there's all of the traditional medicine usages of the mangosteen, which, as I mentioned before, I consider to be better evidence of safety and efficacy than the things that are coming out of science. But I am impressed by the continuing interest of scientists in more than 19 countries in the mangosteen xanthones and what they can do. And like I said before, its economic and its commercial and scientific footprint will never be smaller than it is today, and you have it in your hands. Thank you for listening.
Just an amazing job, Dr. Templeman. You know, when we got into XANGO, we were looking for not just a good company. We were looking for a great company with a product with hard science. And, 14 and a half years ago, there was science, but nothing in comparison. I think when we first started, there were 23 xanthons discovered. Now there's over 70. So if you're listening to this, it's because you care about living longer, healthier. And here's my rationale, because I think I'm even older than you, Dr. Templeman. Nothing is more important than living longer, healthier. And if there's the slightest chance that by my drinking a couple ounces of patented XANGO juice with every meal is going to ensure, hopefully, a better quality of life as I get older, especially with heart disease in my family, diabetes, Alzheimer's. I'm a fan of our patented XANGO juice. So we want to thank you so much for the updated science, and I would suggest that everyone who wants to live longer, healthier, and is willing to listen to this recording understand that this is the only true super fruit on the planet, at least to date. And if you care about living longer, healthier, then the people that you care about should also be doing and drinking XANGO on a daily basis. So again, Dr. T, thank you so much. We appreciate you more than you can imagine. So everyone
Sandy,
in the
it's always
chat
a
room,
pleasure.
Oh, thank you. So everyone say thank you to Dr. Templeman, and we're going to see you in Korea in June, face-to-face,
That's correct.
of course. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So God bless everyone, and have an amazing, amazing weekend. And as I said, the recording will be posted by tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to end the recording now.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.